My name is Tim Kent. I live and work in New York. I mainly do paintings and drawings. The first couple of weeks were really weird because basically my part of, I live in Brooklyn, and so my part of Brooklyn was the sort of corridor of all the people that were working in the services, from the restaurants to delivery to doormen and every sort of service that supported Manhattan. And what ended up happening was this entire strip along the coast of Brooklyn became the sort of corridor of COVID. There's no other way to put it. And we had, I think, within 2 to 3 weeks, we had something like 130,000 cases in a small area right in the area I was living in. And it became completely a dead zone. And many people left the city. And then we had ambulances for like 24 hours a day, probably for about a week to 2 weeks. And I was out there with my dog walking because I had a dog. And my where I live and my studio, they're near each other, and I just took advantage of it. And so I produced a show during COVID, and just put a lot of my anxiety around what was happening into the work at that point. And that was and actually I think I was lucky, and I think my wife was lucky in that we both sort of work creatively and for ourselves, that we were able to channel the emotional stress and the physical stress too, because when you're confined, you need to do something, and it was a great place to put the energy that was happening at the time. So I've found it pretty good. I've been finding it quite creative. Don't you think it's already affected the way we behave as a species? I'm a little bit upset that we're looking at the vaccines coming, because I think it's kind of nice that people are not traveling everywhere the whole time, and I think it's probably forced a type of introspection on most of us. And I think, how will it change? I mean, it's going to take a little while. I think for younger people, I mean, your generation of people, every single night I see young people, say under 30, out there having a good time, because it doesn't affect them as much. And that's great. But I do think it'll change the way, I think it's probably already changed the way we decide we're going to live our lives, in terms of like what we consume, how we consume, where we go, what we do, how long do we go for, all that sort of stuff. But then again, I don't think it's going to be around long enough to have that lasting an impact. We might see sort of subtle things happen in, for example, the Zoom, or any of these sort of chatting apps. This is a whole new thing that we've all really gotten used to, the fact that we're on TV all the time. So that's something that's interesting. And then you have this sort of like integration of the technology into our lives 24/7. Like, I don't know about you, but when we first went into lockdown, people were just sending business texts and everything all the time. And it was like, there was a 24-hour cycle of like people just coming and talking to you, like, because you're nervous or you have anxiety, people are texting you. So it was just like this constant feed. And it took a while to separate from that, but now I've gotten used to the fact that I have like 2 cameras looking at me right now and 3 computer screens, right? I mean, that's the reality. And then, as these companies that begin to sort of do the sort of, no other way to put it, but the sort of like information grabbing, I mean, we're going to get all these sorts of cool eye things and everything soon. So this is the first step of the full integration, this sort of like cybernetic integration. And I think that COVID has probably forced that upon us for sure. And if I could say one more thing, I think my wife put it best. She said, we're now living in the age of viruses, where we are now, probably for the rest of the time humanity is on Earth, we will be living in a hyper accelerated viral environment. And that is crazy. Basically, I'm going to start a new body of work at the end of November. But right now, I'm just kind of finishing up small pieces for some group shows I'm in. So one went out to Istanbul last week, is now showing with Pilipneli Gallery out there. I have a work that's going up in tomorrow for a show here in Chelsea with Hollis Taggart Gallery, and I've got another 2 pieces going out to Montreal before the end of the year, and then I'll probably begin the next body of work. And I'm deciding on what I'm going to do with it in terms of how cyber I want it to be, or how naturalistic I want it to be. I'm trying to figure out the right tone for the work, you know. And do I want it to be sexy, or do I want it to be scary? So that's kind of like where I'm thinking. You know, sexy like Gattaca. Yeah, I mean, everything ultimately goes online. And I will be posting all the time because oh, that's another thing that happened with COVID, was that the fact that you know, because I'm a painter, I'm always in my space. And you're a media guy, right? So you're always in the media world of media. But as a painter, I'm always kind of like, wow, screw media, I don't need media, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, wow, man, I really realized the power of this. Sort of like, we are no longer interested in local things, or I'm no longer interested in local things like art exhibits and stuff like that, when there's an entire global audience to see this stuff. And the fact of the matter is, it's like Instagram can send out to something like 2.5 billion people, like, right? I don't know, I think that changes. Like, I think it on the one hand, it's weird because when I start a work, I feel like I want it to be something. And I have a direction that I think I want it to go in. And it's usually when I get rid of my own ideas that something interesting starts to happen. And it doesn't always happen. You know, a lot of the paintings that I think are successful are ones that they kind of follow through with my sort of general vision of the work, right? But I've also had pieces that constantly surprise me because I'm experimenting in them and I'm trying things. I'm letting the painting do what it wants to do. And that allows for a type of language that is foreign to me, but that presents me with new ideas. So I suppose what I'm looking for is some sort of presentation of the world we live in that is exciting to my eye. And it might not make a lot of sense because I'm using a lot of these sort of antique structures to house my sort of narratives in. But I think that there is something disconcerting enough about the work that it flips that traditional narrative upside down. So that's that sort of duality and that surprise is probably why I paint. What I'm looking for, I don't always know, and I usually find it as I'm working. That's not even a question in my mind. I mean, you know, first there's a romantic notion to painting. You know, the sort of like, maybe the notion of why we paint might change, right? So in the 19th and 20th century, it's sort of like this rebel artist, right? And as we kind of move into sort of heavy techno landscapes, we're seeing a lot more collaborative works happening, right? But I do think the simplicity of painting and the challenges of it and the unpredictability of it is completely human, in the sense that it's a base material process. It's not a technical process, right? Whereas a lot of the stuff that I see that's being produced digitally always comes under the umbrella of having somebody else's vision have created the program in which you're operating, which means that you were simply operating in a subset of creativity, right? And I do think painting allows for a type, even if it looks boring as hell, and it has no relevancy whatsoever to the contemporary dialogue of art, right? It's more of a fetishistic practice at this point. But it does allow all these sort of natural accidents to happen. And these are things that you can't get digitally, period. No matter how sophisticated the machinery is. Well, maybe in a few years' time when AI really takes off, but then who needs humans at that point? Practice. And critical practice, I think that's good. I think having people give you feedback is really good. I think being open to feedback is really good. But the craft itself is just work. It's making yourself get up every single day, say no to all the parties, and working and experimenting, and that's it, really. But you know, there's nothing romantic about it, that's for sure. And it's a lot of work. And I think if somebody really wants to be good at what they do, they just have to work really hard at it, and with a little bit of luck, they might be able to do something with it. You know.